of their inspiration. Some analytical philosophers, too, found that he was not so remote from their interests as they had assumed, and in that reciprocal motion that is so characteristic of academic life, congratulated him on having had, in embryonic fashion, some of their insights, while at the same time reassuring themselves about those insights by invoking his authority. There is now a flourishing Nietzsche industry, and almost certainly more books appear on him each year than on any other thinker, thanks to the appeal he has for so many disparate schools of thought and anti-thought. It is idle to pretend that he would have been entirely displeased by this phenomenon. During his lifetime, and unless I specify otherwise, I shall always mean by that the one that finished when he went mad in 1889, 11 years before his death, he was almost completely neglected, and though that did not make him bitter, as hardly anything did, it caused him distress, because he believed that he had vital truths to impart to his contemporaries which they were ignoring at a terrible cost, one of his most accurate prophecies. But he would have looked with scorn on almost everything that has been written or done under his aegis, and the successful takeover by the academic world, though it cannot compare in horror with some of the other appropriations he has suffered, would have seemed to him most like a final defeat, because he wanted at all costs not to be assimilated to the world of learning, where everything becomes a matter for discussion and nothing for action. Before we move into an account of his views, it is worth stopping briefly and pondering what it might be about his work that has proved so attractive to such diverse movements and schools of thought. Only later will a clearer answer emerge, but it seems, as a preliminary explanation, that it is precisely the idiosyncrasies of his manner that are first found refreshing. His books, after the early The Birth of Tragedy and the Untimely Meditations, are usually composed of short essays, often less than a page long and verging on the aphoristic, though, as we shall see, crucially different from aphorisms as normally composed and appreciated. That is, 1 or 2 line encapsulations of the nature of human experience demanding acceptance through their lapidary certainty. The number of subjects discussed is vast, including many that it is surprising to find mentioned by a philosopher, such matters as climate, diet, exercise, and Venice. And often his reflections are in no particular order. That means that he is much easier than most philosophers to dip into, and his frequently expressed loathing of systems means that one can do that with a good conscience. Many of his quasi-aphorisms are radical in content, and though one may gain only a vague impression of what he favors, one will certainly find out a great deal about his dislikes, most often expressed in terms that are both witty and extreme. What he seems to dislike is every aspect of contemporary civilization, most particularly that of the Germans, and for the reader that is bracing. His underlying view is that if we don't make a drastically new start, we are doomed, since we are living in the wreckage of 2,000 and more years of fundamentally mistaken ideas about almost everything that matters, in, as it were, the decadence of what was anyway deadly, offers carte blanche to people who fancy the idea of a clean break with their whole cultural inheritance. Nietzsche was under no illusions about the impossibility of such a schism. Even so, the variety of interpretations of his work, which far from diminishing as the decades pass, seem to be multiplying, though in less apocalyptic forms than previously, needs more explanation. It suggests to the outsider that he must have been exceptionally vague and probably contradictory. There is something in both those charges, but they seem more impressive and damning than they are if one does not realize and continually keep in mind that in the 16 years during which he wrote his mature works, from BT onwards, he was developing his views at a rate that has no parallel, and that he rarely went to the bother of signposting his changes of mind. What he more often did was to try to see his earlier works in a new light, surveying his career in a way that suggests he thought one could not understand his later writings without a knowledge of his previous ones, to see how he had advanced, and thus taking himself to be exemplary of how modern man, immured in the decaying culture of the 19th century, might move from acquiescence in it to rebellion and suggestions for radical transformation. In 1886 in particular, when he was on the verge, though he could not have known it, of his last creative phase, he spent a great deal of energy on his previous books, providing new, sometimes harshly critical introductions to them, and in the case of The Gay Science, writing a long new final book.